Hey friends, welcome to the channel. I'm Tirso and I'm a creative director based in New York City. Having a foundation in design is your key to success in this industry. A great place to start is by learning the design principles. With these principles, you can incorporate them into your process and start taking away some of the guesswork. I'm not going to lump all of them into one video. The principles take time to understand, so I'm going to take the time to explain them to you thoroughly. In this video, I'll be covering the design principle of balance, symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and radial balance. I've also included a guide for you to reference in the description below. If you're looking for portfolio work, I've also included some project files and some briefs for you to experiment on your own. Symmetrical balance is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's when your layout has equal amounts of weight on both sides. The easiest way to think of this is the mirror effect, but this isn't always the case, and I will show you that in a little bit. Let's put this into context by designing some layouts. All the examples I'm showing won't have too many design elements because I really want to focus on balance. Our layout is essentially done, but I do want to finish the details. We can add a lead-in for the first paragraph, and then we also want to typeset our body copy by fixing the rags and widows, and now all of our text fits. Design fact, for those of you that read magazines, do you ever wonder why they're so easy to read? It's because the type is set properly, the columns are narrow, and that makes it faster to read things. This layout totally works. It's clean and easy to read. It also takes advantage of the symmetrical hero photo, making it more impactful. As always, we can explore more. The line length isn't wrong here, but it can get ever so slightly shorter. In order to condense our columns and still fit the text, we would need to create more space. We can do that by moving the headline to read on the top of the image. This typeface isn't reading well because there's so much contrast between the strokes, so let's switch over to a sans serif. In this direction, I think the headline is too long, so we can shorten it, and we can now go bigger. Let's move the subhead up closer, and now we have more space to adjust our columns. We can also try a different direction for the layout. We established earlier that the centered text is symmetrical, so let's start with that. Then we add the subhead. Now we add the image. This time I won't go full bleed. For the body text, I'll use 4 columns, and there's another option. Perhaps you have a situation where you want to use 2 photos. We can split the main hero area into 2 equal parts to accommodate both photos. This layout is fine, but we can make it more interesting by adjusting the weight. I mentioned earlier about looking at your text as shapes. On the left, we have an image with 2 text blocks, and on the right, we have an image with 2 text blocks. As long as the weight is the same on both sides, it's still symmetrically balanced. What I want to do here is bring this left image down so it balances the image on the top right, and then the text also balances each other out on opposite ends. I want to maintain the original image of the hero, so I'm going to flip the images. Lastly, I don't think this layout is benefiting from the 2 columns of text, so I'm going to go back to 1 column. Here are those 4 options again. They're all viable solutions for the layout, and they're all symmetrically balanced. Although we're focusing on balance in this video, I want to go over the other design principles being used so you can see how they work together. We started with hierarchy. In the first option, the image was the main element on the page. In the last option, we used the headline as the most important element. To accommodate the space we needed earlier, we used the design principle of white space, which also balances how heavy the image is above. In its simplest form, the last 2 images have the same colorway, which utilizes the design principle of unity because they feel like they relate to each other. I altered the color on the other image for this layout so you can see what it would look like if the other image didn't have the same colorway. Let's look at another example. In editorial design, when designing spreads, it's fairly common for the text on one side to relate to the other on the left to have some relationship to the right. Here we have a symmetrical photo of a basketball court on the right side, so it makes sense to have a symmetrical layout of the headline and subhead on the left side. There's always multiple solutions, so what is another way we can do this while still maintaining symmetrical balance? Before I dive in here, I want you to take some time to think about how you would approach a different solution. I'll give 10 seconds so we don't extend the length of this video, but feel free to pause for more time. So the approach I took does require a more intermediate understanding of typography. When working on options for headlines, it's common to explore what it will look like in title case, sentence case, uppercase, and very seldomly, lowercase. Let's look at the headline in uppercase. In addition to looking at your bodies of text as shapes, we can also look at the individual letters as shapes. What's interesting about this headline in uppercase is that all of the letters are symmetrical individually. Yes, the W isn't perfectly symmetrical, but visually it still reads that way. We can try an option where we stack all the letters to emphasize that symmetry. It is often taboo to stack your type, but because of the symmetry, I think it works well here. For the rest of the headline, it can be styled and placed in between. In this case, we're using hierarchy, which forces the reader to read the headline correctly. And lastly, we're using contrast in the type size as well as the type style. Let's look at one more example. This time I have the image on the left side. I style the type on the right very delicately with centered text. What ideas can you think of to push the design here? I started this direction by using the circle shape on the left side. It feels quite big, so I went smaller. We can do a simple solution by centering the text within the circle. What's nice about this is that the shape created by the text mimics the arch of the circle at the top. If you wanted to push this a little further, we can play off of another element from the photograph, which is this diagonal line formed by the dessert. And with that diagonal, I created this layout. To mimic the diagonal line from the image, I simply rotated the axis. Symmetry doesn't need to be perfectly vertical or horizontal. What helps with this solution is the fact that the shape of a circle is still maintained. Other things to mention, we're using the design principle of movement in the title because of the arch of the text. We're also taking advantage of the Gestalt principle of closure because it's not a full circle, but our mind finishes the shape for us. Asymmetrical balance is when your layout isn't symmetrical, but it still feels balanced. This approach takes a little bit more work, but it does create more visual interest in your designs. So I have one issue here. I have designed not hundreds, but thousands of magazine layouts. Even still, I am struggling to explain how to achieve asymmetrical balance. I asked a photographer friend the other day and she didn't really have an answer either. We know how to do it, but it's just hard to explain into words. So I'm just gonna go through a bunch of examples and I'm hoping by the end of this segment, it'll make sense. I'm gonna go back to one of the layouts we had earlier. We've already established that this works as a design solution, but we can alter this layout to be asymmetrical. We originally went with a symmetrical layout because the hero is a symmetrical image. In order to break that symmetry, let's swap out the hero image for one with a different angle. I'm also going to shift my grid to 5 columns here and increase the margins for more white space. Remember, design is fluid, so learn to be explorative in your process versus going all in on one direction. To make the hero photo asymmetrical, I'm going to reduce the size and bleed it only to the left side. We can now change the alignment from our head and subhead to left aligned. I'm also going to flip the order so it goes headline first. This is already an asymmetrical layout, but let's finish with some additional adjustments. I can add a caption. Since we have 5 columns, I'm using the 4th column on the left for body text, and then the last column for the caption. You can also try an option with a drop cap instead of a lead-in. We can push the contrast here further by using an even larger drop cap. I adjusted the text accordingly to align with it. We'll move the caption down to align with the text, and then finish with a touch of color. This layout is balanced, but not symmetrical, so let's talk about it. The photo is the heaviest thing on the page. What balances out that heaviness is how much white space there is around the image, and the drop cap really helps create that. The asymmetry of the page is further emphasized with the image breaking through the left alignment of the text. Here I have a page with 3 images. If you're not aware, I'm a huge foodie. I've chosen 3 chefs here that I love and I've eaten at all of their restaurants. For Chef Greg and Chef Anne-Sophie, I've eaten at multiple of their locations. Chef Maxime makes the most incredible pain au chocolat. Let's start with the images. As we saw in an earlier example, the color of the images here don't really match. I'm just gonna do a little adjustment to the coloring so that they relate a little better. It's not perfect, but we're close enough. Okay, so the easiest way to approach a layout with 3 images is to create a simple hierarchy, one large, one medium, and one small. For now, I'll just go in the order that they're in: Chef Greg the largest, Chef Anne-Sophie smaller in size, and then Chef Maxime the smallest. We can place our largest photo in the corner. By bleeding the photo, it allows the image to be bigger because it breaks through the margin. Since we're bleeding on 2 sides, it gives room for the photo to be even bigger. We can move our medium-sized image up, and then our smallest image over here. Nothing complicated. I can show you how I broke up the grid. The largest image takes up 3 columns and the bleed. The medium image takes up 3 columns, and our smallest image only takes up 2 columns. One more thing to mention: because of the placement of the images, we've created some movement on the page which forces the reader to scan in this order. We can now drop in our head and subhead, and then our captions in the general location as our photos. The text in the bottom left isn't clear which photo the caption belongs to, so we can fix that like this. The alignment of the text is suggestive of which image it belongs to. This space here suggests that it doesn't belong to the image on the right. On that note, let's make one final adjustment to the top caption and create some space to the left of it. Okay, great. The information is organized properly, the movement is nice, white space is plentiful, and the images work well together. I did 2 other layout options where I changed the hierarchy of the images. Here's where it becomes subjective. At the end of the day, you can only print one of your layouts. As long as you have justification, it doesn't really matter which one because they all work. For this set, I would probably choose this layout. If we look at the hierarchy of images, it goes in this order. That order is further emphasized by the positioning of their heads in the photos. The angle of Chef Anne-Sophie's head is going down in the direction of Chef Maxime, who is looking down, bringing you to the area where Chef Greg's section is. This was not a coincidence. These are things that I look at when designing a page, designed with purpose, and you'll learn what to look out for over time. I actually did do one more layout. There's a world where you may want all 3 chefs to have equal importance, which would mean that the images should be similar in size. The layout still works, but because we removed hierarchy, it is a little bit less interesting. We'll do another layout, this time with 5 images. Let's use the same process by creating a hierarchy. Since we have 5 images, I'll do 1 large, 2 medium, and 3 small. This video is starting to sound like I'm ordering at a fast food restaurant, but I digress. I've adjusted sizes here. This time, I'll anchor the largest photo on the bottom right. When we're talking about balance, it means equal distribution of weight. The real estate the other 4 images are taking up is roughly the same amount of space as the larger image, so to balance a layout, they should be placed on the other side. Again, not a hard rule, but a systematic way for you to find a design solution. We can split the 2 medium-sized images, one bleeding at the top and the other bleeding on the left. And then we can split the other 2 images opposite of each other, but somewhat close to one of the medium-sized images. This feels balanced to me as a layout already. We can drop in our text elements and then adjust to fit the grid. Here's another layout with the largest image anchored on the left of the page. Following what we did in the previous layout, I separated the 2 medium images and the 2 smaller images. Same process, multiple solutions. And with that, here's another possible solution. In this direction, I've treated all the images as one large block, just like the layout with 1 image. We balance heaviness through white space, so everything around it should feel fairly light. Within the block of images, we still maintain balance. We have 2 larger images opposite of each other. The one on the bottom left, there's a smaller image, and then 2 on the top right to balance it out. The asymmetry in this layout utilizes the grid, 4 columns of images, and only 1 column for text. Last example, but multiple layouts, I will use content from another passion of mine, tennis. This is a photo I took at Roland Garros. Let's make some posters out of it. I'm not going to use a grid this time, we'll just use spatial relations instead. We need a title for this. I'm just going to call it Roland Garros. Now we have to decide which we want to be the most important. Since all the examples have been with the images having the largest hierarchy, let's make the title really big here. Actually, even bigger. The placement I have for the photo aligns to the stem of the R and the X height of Garros. The title is extremely heavy, and in the photo, these gentlemen over here are making this area even heavier because the color is so dark. Ideally, we want white space around this heaviness. Since we have a photo, we can actually adjust the photo so the crop mostly uses the lighter areas. Let's drop in some info here. I just have a date and a CTA to the website. We haven't done too much typography in the examples, so I'm just gonna add some styling. I'll align this block to the top of the O, and then let's just move it over to the right. For the CTA, I'll align it to the stem of the R. I mentioned that the headline feels heavy. The black isn't helping, so we can reduce that with color. Since the content is tennis, I'll use a green and a yellow. One for the court and the other for the ball. There we go. If you want to lighten up the bottom of the page, you can move the title to the top left to create some white space.
Radial balance is when your elements are arranged in a circle or spiral pattern. I feel like this isn't used that often. I mean, what's even the point of radial balance? There isn't one because circles don't have points. I'm partially kidding. Circles are naturally symmetrical. In order to get radial balance right, we need to rely on scale and movement.
I'll start with the product page of watches. A radial layout makes sense for this because watches have a radial nature to them. We can start with centered text to anchor our circle, and then let's place all the watches in a circle around the text. We can create balance through scale by making a few of them larger and a few of them smaller. The position of the 3 larger watches are distributed fairly evenly throughout the circle with 2 to 3 watches in between them. The smaller watches are also distributed evenly, as are the medium ones.
We still have to lay this out, but just think of the circle as a guide. It is the crosswalk in New York City where it's just a suggestion.
I made these adjustments, and yes, it is not a perfect circle, but when it comes to a radial layout, it's about the movement of the page, and this still moves around the text. I can drop in the captions, and this layout is finished. Radial balance isn't specifically a circle, it can also be a spiral, so I did this layout. It also works since there's an actual start to the spiral of the product above the headline. It gave me the idea of arranging the watches by color, and I ended up with this. Here's another layout that I put together. For the spiral design we did earlier, it wasn't really that easy to see the spiral. When in doubt, do not hide it. Literally, just use a circle and your reader will naturally go in the direction of the arc. In this case, I added 2 more circles in the center, a teal to mimic the inside of a record, and then a stroke of a circle as a decorative element. I was really trying hard not to use a lot of design elements in these examples, but since I used color here, it was looking really flat. A very simple way to add dimension to your layouts is by using overlap, which you can see in the Marvin Gaye and Jackson 5 covers. The last detail here is that each album cover becomes gradually larger as you read around the arc. This is the last layout to go over. We've been using other design principles to achieve balance. What I wanted to showcase here is that you can even use the different types of balance with each other. I'm using radial balance for the elements surrounding the copy. The columns of text are symmetrical in width, but I made sure that the text on the right ran much longer, so it was visually asymmetrical.
That's a majority of what you need to know about balance in graphic design. The rest will come naturally to you as you work on more projects. Now it's your turn. There is a creative brief folder in the description below if you want to work on some projects on your own. The images are all mine, so there's no issues with copyright. Let me know what your thoughts are in the video. If you have any questions, comment below and support the channel by subscribing. I'll see you next time.